Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to each one of you to the monthly knowledge webinar conducted by KELP. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Sakshi Shetty. I'm a lawyer by profession and I work as a senior subject matter expert with KELP, and I'll be your moderator for this session. For all those who are here on this platform for the first time, let me quickly brief you all about this monthly knowledge webinar sessions conducted by KELP. So we at KELP, along with the Indian Lawyers Association, conduct this monthly webinar on every last Thursday of the month, where we choose a topic from the POSH Act related subject matter or any trending topic for that matter and discuss over the same. Our topic for this particular webinar is workplace or not. The concept of workplace under the POSH Act extends far beyond the four walls of your organization. As organizations embrace hybrid work, business travel, client interactions, and digital collaborations, understanding the scope of employer responsibilities and IC jurisdiction over these matters have become increasingly important. This webinar will explore evolving interpretation of the workplace, including insights from the recent Bombay High Court judgment, and provide practical guidance on addressing POSH obligations in today's dynamic work environment. For this, we also have industry specialists as panelists who will be sharing their expert advice and insights on the topic chosen. Speaking of the panelists, let me welcome you all to both very extremely talented individuals here. Starting from Gayatri Swaminathan. Gayatri is a certified chartered accountant based out of Chennai. She's a business vertical head in one of India's leading global capability centers in the space of automotive and automotive finance. In addition to her executive role, Gayatri is committed to fostering a supportive corporate culture as the executive sponsor of the Pride India chapter. And in her role as presiding officer, she tries to create an equitable work environment for all employees. So, welcome, Gayatri. Thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you, Sakshi. Look forward to the discussion.
Our next panelist is Niharika. Niharika is a subject matter expert in POSH with an LLM in international law. She has delivered over 100 plus training sessions on workplace sexual harassment, prevention and redressal, served as an external member on many internal committees, and has been a council member with WICCI's Anti-Sexual Harassment Council. She also brings a rare operator's lens to this conversation as a CEO of Mega Metals, a manufacturing firm. Hello and welcome to you, Niharika.
Thank you, Sakshi. Thank you for having me.
So hello all the participants as well. So the session goes in and I'll be asking a few questions to our panelists and they'll be answering the same. Of course, as participants, you all might also have certain questions, but we'll address those questions either through the chat box or at the end of the session where we open the floor for questions. So in between the session, I would request all the participants to be on mute and take advantage of our expert insights and guidance being provided by both of our panelists. So without wasting much time, I'll quickly jump into asking questions. The first question is to you, Niharika. How does the POSH Act define workplace and why is this definition broader than a traditional office?
Okay, thank you for the question, Sakshi. So before I answer the direct question, I would want to set a pretext for people who don't know the background behind the law. So the law was made primarily on the principles laid down in Vishakha's case, the Vishakha judgment, which laid down certain guidelines that the organizations are supposed to follow in order to ensure a safe working place for the women at workforce. Now, it is to be understood that the women at workforce still constitute a very small percentage of the total workforce, and they came to the active workforce very later in time. So it was recognized, it was noted and acknowledged that maybe the attitude, the system, the procedures are not apt enough for them to have an equitable environment to thrive. And in order to keep safety in place, they issued certain guidelines. Now, that was in 1997, and those were guidelines. Now, they were not, it was not a compliance, it was not mandatory for organizations to follow. And we all know that in 2012, when Nirbhaya case happened, it kind of agitated the public to demand more safety for women going out to work. And as a product of that, in 2013, this law was made. Now, why am I giving a history behind it? Because when we are deciphering any definition in law, we need to understand the intent behind the making of law, why this law was required. This law is a protective law made under constitutional guarantee. Now, why protective law? Because it is made for a minority, that is women at workplace. So the intent behind the law was to ensure that we are providing that harmonious, equal, fair, free, safe working place to women at workplace. Now, when we are doing that, the definition that was put in, black and white on paper included a certain physical aspect, that is your office area, the transportation provided by the office, the places that you're visiting for your work, something which was very, very apparent. But again, any law, it's an expansive, it is a ever interpreting law. It is something which is building, it is in process of being better. So the courts are actively involved in giving the expansive definitions to us. And it was decided, I think, the case was in 2012 alone, which was about, I think, the employment, which was it, which there's this case under employment laws of India, where workplace was being adjudicated on in that as well. And the same was picked up by the lawmakers, that we cannot have a physical boundary to workplace. Now,
Yes.
with the change of style of working, an employee is taken out of the physical space. It's traveling to and from work, traveling to a place for work, and all of that should be included in the definition. And that is what was put down in POSH. And it was obviously the intent, the constitutional intent, the intent behind the legislature, and the interpretation of courts in various cases after that, that workplace should be given an expansive definition. But obviously this comes with a certain restriction, that we cannot include anything and everything in workplace. The outer boundaries is said by that there should be nexus to work. There should be a nexus to the employer's control. And why? Because obviously we need to adjudicate, we need to go through the inquiry. And how will we do that if we don't have any outer limit and include any place as workplace? So yes, I feel, I hope that answers the basic question.
It definitely does. And I think referring back to the main, idea of bringing this law into existence, the Vishakha guidelines, the Vishakha case, I think it makes it very clear, that, as you mentioned, that the law is still building. We are still looking into these aspects, which might not be very relevant back in those days, but now it is. For example, online platforms, hybrid work mode. This wasn't really in existence back in 2013, but now it is. And one of the cases that I remember was recognized by Supreme Court is Sanjeev Mishra versus Bank of Baroda, wherein the workplace boundaries were extended to online and virtual spaces as well. So I think with growing, needs, this definition also needs to be expanded. We'll further look into these questions and understand how well we can interpret these. So my next question is to you, Gayatri. What does the phrase arising out of or during the course of employment mean in practical terms?
Okay, it's actually a great question, and particularly as I've sat in different IC discussions and inquiries, one question that keeps coming back to us was, what was the premise with which this incident really transpired? What led to the incident? What were the circumstances that led to the incident? And very, very practically put, it goes somewhere back to the fact that these two individuals were employed or had interacted during the course of the employment. And I think Niharika alluded to that, saying that, where's the nexus? Why was there a circumstance for these individuals to interact? So I think that is the premise with which I would, sort of look at any um, inquiry or any scope from a POSH, from an IC perspective. Did this situation arise because of these two individuals, or the situation or the place at which they interacted? Did it happen on account of their employment? I think that, very practically put, that is the yardstick, and it's quite simply stated in my mind. And today in the digital space, you could talk about different forms of interaction, but very simply put, did the interaction, irrespective of the form at which it happened, the place at which it happened, was it the context behind it employment? or during the course of the employment. So I think that is a very practical way that which we have applied. We continue to apply, and that probably is very helpful as we look at the scope of our work at IC.
Thank you for that. I think that really for us to understand that when we look into the practical terms of these statements mentioned in the law, how do we look at it from a organization perspective, from an IC or a presiding officer's perspective? Moving on, next question to you, Niharika. Can incidents at client sites, vendor premises, conferences, offsites, or business travel fall within the POSH coverage?
Yes, I think they do. It is obviously yes. And plus, taking it forward from what Gayatri just said, that the yardstick against which you will, as IC members, judge jurisdiction is it arising out of employment?
Yes.
And if it is, then yes, be it a client site or a vendor premise or conferences or your training programs, anything on those notions become workplace. But then the point of contention arises is that who is the respondent in this case, right? Client site harassment happens between two employees of one organization, it's easy because then it's under your jurisdiction. But if let's say the respondent is of the client's organization, and that becomes jurisdiction of the client's IC, and the IC of aggrieved or the complainant's IC can work in close proximity with that IC to resolve the issue. Yes, client becomes a different thing, but again, vendor is within an employer's purview, can be taken up by your IC. Conferences are within the same organization's IC purview. Now it also, like, obviously we can't take just workplace in consideration and say that yes, all of these things become within the jurisdiction, but yes, they would be considered workplace. But yes, we have seen with the latest case, the
Dr.
latest
Shoaib
Bombay High
Malik
Court.
case.
Yeah, the Bombay High Court is providing the outer nexus, the outer boundaries of what should be considered in workplace. But yes, the Saurabh Malik case reiterates that all of these places, it is just about like what Gayatri very accurately and precisely, clearly, said, that the nexus to the employment, and that is the only yardstick. Is it arising out of the issue, your employment to the organization or not?
Yes, and as you mentioned about the Shoaib Malik case, one of the statements given by the courts there was also that this is a female-centric act. We should make the life of the female easy. We should help her out in such situations. And if we really look into the very core definition of everything, we might not be able to extend that kind of support to the female for which she comes back, looking up to the internal committee, looking up to her organization. So I think that really helps.
Yes, and that is something which the courts have reiterated in parallel, employment law adjudications also, like cases addressing cases of workmen compensation, etc. They have said that that it's not just physical workplace, include travel to and fro, include other places where you're out of your employment. So that's something which we are increasing the boundaries of workplace, not just in POSH, but in every relevant employment law as well. And that is because of the change of way of working. So yes, that is definitely something which has been addressed.
Thank you, Niharika.
Sakshi, if I may just add, Sakshi and Niharika, with your permission, I think what I've been experiencing and seeing is a fallout is how ICs of different organizations need to come together and collaborate for the right, for to be fair and, provide justice to all. That's, the recent past, especially, I think, as we have encountered situations of complaints, one thing that becomes every alternate or every 2-3, because organizations are collaborating, and when organizations collaborate, there is bound to be such incidents that happen. So we will have to, IC's role in collaborating, being very forthcoming to talk to different organizations and their ICs, be open and transparent, will actually only lead to making the process more transparent and credible for everybody involved. I think that is going to become very crucial, in how corporates can play a role in this as well.
Yeah. True. And sorry, I just wanted to, because this question is talking about various places and whether they are in workplace or not, and we've got questions also. So there is a common question that I've seen as being an external member and a trainer also, that what happens when two employees from your organization are at a place which is informal, out of company time, not because of employment, and something happens there, and do you take the case or not? As it's like, obviously there are, as an IC member, when you're sitting, you can reason for and against anything. It is upon your interpretation to in addition to the courts and laws interpretations. And as a trainer, as an external member, I've always interpreted it within my purview. Because when we say that, if two people are related because of work, and the impact of that incident is coming back to work, it should always be construed as a workplace issue.
Yes.
And the whole objective behind having this law and making ICs is to address the problem at grassroots level. And we can only do this when we are understanding that, yes, this is something that we can inquire on, and we can give justice. We should take those cases if they are falling in within that jurisdiction through our interpretations. Unless we are, till the time we are justifying the jurisdiction, I feel it should not be a problem.
True, very true. And I think, as you all just mentioned, it's on the organization, it's on the internal committees how they take up these cases. And in the recent Bombay High Court case as well, the case that went into appeal, I do understand and realize that when the complainant came back to her organization and filed a complaint, they did take a very immediate action. They went to the respondents' organization, they went to SBI, they were told SBI about everything that has happened, and SBI did take an action there. They did do an investigation. They did not discard the situation. They did not discard the case. So I think internal committees, presiding officers, organizations do understand their role. They do understand that the main focus is sexual harassment. We have to work towards it to prevent, prohibit. We have to do that. But of course, if the courts really are supportive there and let the internal committees look into these aspects as well, I think that will encourage more internal committees to take up such cases and address these issues at grassroots level as well.
That's true. That's true. You know what? I feel like, as a lawyer, my brain immediately went to that. If the court is saying it should not be an IC thing in POSH, I would immediately convert that inquiry into a misconduct inquiry. Do it again.
Yes.
Misconduct is free.
Exactly.
Misconduct is free, right? So sexual harassment is a criminal offense. If it has outraged the modesty of a woman, it's a criminal offense, and it can be taken up as a misconduct hearing. Simple.
Yes.
So I always suggest ways out, that you do this or do this, because the ultimate goal is to just ensure a harmonious, it's not punishing people, it's ensuring a harmonious workplace environment is built. And that can only be done when everybody is feeling safe, everybody is free enough to voice their problems, tell their boundaries, and work freely. So that is something people can perhaps take note of. Misconduct.
Yes, rightly said, actually. Yes, true. I think that's the best way out there, and we can definitely take up these incidents through that particular route as well.
Yeah.
Moving on, next question to you, Gayatri. How should organizations evaluate complaints involving remote work, virtual meetings, emails, messaging platforms, or increasing social media interactions between these employees? Gayatri, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I mean, it's going to sound a little repetitive, but I think the law is so clear in certain fundamentals that it is out there to protect women. It is out there to talk about the impact to women, and it is out there talking about what is the situation that arose out of employment. So it is quite broad enough to encompass interactions that happen through social media, that happen through any other virtual meetings, messaging platforms, etc., etc. Now, as we continue to encounter situations, and of late, I think many people who have been on ICs or who are external panel members will definitely agree that social media and external messaging platforms figure predominantly in our inquiries and our discussions, and sometimes it is also generational divide that plays a role in how and how we have to sort of continue to understand the lingo that goes behind. But fundamentally, I think there are a few principles that I think we should continue to apply. What has been the impact to the employee? What is the situation with respect to consent? and what is it that it means. I mean, did it arise out of workplace? I think, if we are able to keep these principles in mind, then irrespective of the medium, the clarity with which we approach an issue becomes that much easier. So I think that is, and really, it is about, as organizations, we are out there to make sure it's a safe workplace for all. So these basic principles, if we are able to keep in mind, I think the mode, medium, place, take a secondary step. The principles stand in front of us. So I think that is the way, I would, practically, really practically look at something that comes up through social media. And I did see a couple of questions around this, on the I think on the chat box as well. So I think it is intimidation in any form, or harassment in any form, is what we're talking about. So verbal, non-verbal, physical, etc., etc. So my take is, the only note of that I would take as an IC is probably spending time to understand the context of these social media interactions, because sometimes you have to spend time to work with complainants and the respondents to understand if there was, at any point of time, things that could have been, misconstrued as consent, etc., etc. Because I think we're talking about being fair for all. So I think that extra effort is what is required when it comes to social media interactions. And I think, in a way, social media interactions are also the other cap that we need to have in mind, especially when it comes to social media interactions, is these they live forever in a sense. They can live forever. So I think the fact that you'll have to be extra careful about protecting the data that goes behind all this becomes, in a way, the extra responsibility of the IC also, in providing that guidance to the complainant, depending on the on the situation of the case.
True, very true. And I think when we speak about the social media platforms, we usually get this defense coming in from the respondent side that it's a social media platform. It's nothing related to workplace. How is it even considered? But I think you put it out very clearly and very nicely that the key principles should be given first preference than the mode or the way it happened. So I think, yeah, that really sums it up really well. So thank you for that. Moving on, next question to you, Niharika. When does employer provide transport or accommodation become a part of the workplace for posh purposes?
So, like I've already discussed this in my previous question, that because we are doing an expansive definition of workplace, so yes, out and out employer provided transportation and accommodation becomes a part of workplace, because if the incident is occurring there, clearly people present there are related to each other, arising out of the employment. But there was this one case where the respondent was in the employer provided transport, and because that person was wearing their uniform and the logo of the company was present, when that person had gotten down, he had an altercation with one of the women present at that bus stop. And as a result, what happened, that woman came to the IC and filed a posh complaint there. Now that became very tricky, that it had all the elements mixed in. The person was representing the organization, the person was traveling in the company provided transport, so all workplace, but then they were not related because of work. So we have to draw a boundary sometime. Yes, they are representing. If suppose that person had done something which was amoral or criminal or wrongful conduct, then there are public platforms. You can go to police, you can go to courts and file a case. But then we have to have an outer boundary, because we are like an organization can be responsible for employees and employment purposes, but out of that we need to also understand that they're individual people. And I feel like to have some kind of a boundary, to have as many policies as you can, is the best way out as an organization, and to have clarity as an IC member, like have a digital footprint policy, that what is allowed, what is not allowed. If you're doing something on an individual level, the organization should not be represented in any way, should not be displayed in any way, because people are so uh, politically opinionated these days as well. And when you're suppose on LinkedIn and doing something and that amounts to an offense in any of the laws, then the organization is dragged in. So obviously have as many policies as possible to avoid any confusion, but the principle remains the same, that if the people are present in a place arising out, because of a need of the employment, and or the if impact of that incident is coming back to the work, that's your core principle, right?
Thank you, Niharika. I think that example and that message is a good key takeaway for the organizations and the ICs that would really help them better. Moving on, next question to you, Gayatri. What factors should an internal committee consider before deciding whether it has jurisdiction over an offsite or digital incident? You're on mute, Gayatri.
So I didn't want, yeah. So, I mean, as ICs, and sometimes we are overly excited to take on more. I think there are points of time when we will have to step back as well to understand if there is something that should not be under our purview, right? So I think when it comes to the clear tests are constant. Did the would the incident have occurred if not for these two individuals being employed in this organization, or these two individuals interacting on account of the employment of one of them in an organization? I think if you really look at it, that's the first test that I would look at. The second test was, I mean, if it was a transport, then was it something that or if it was an offsite incident, was it obviously organized by the organ? I mean, if it's an offsite that is hosted by the company, yes, big yes. I think we would have to definitely put our IC caps on and say that. But there are also situations that we have come across where people would gather as friends, right? And something untoward happens between two individuals, uh, misconstrued as consent, etc., etc. But we still go back to the fact that would these individuals have interacted if not for their employment?
Yes.
Right? And I think Niharika also pointed out, how does it come back to the workplace? How does it get impacted to the workplace? I think these are some factors that we have to definitely keep in mind. Again, if there is if we are talking about different organizations, it's an offsite in a different organization, something like that happened, then I think the discussion between two ICs on whose jurisdiction it falls under. I mean, I think historically we have always had the respondent's jurisdiction. The practice has been that the respondent's IC picks it up and then reviews and recommends action. But I think off late the wider recommendation has been for complainants IC to pick it up. So recently we came up with a situation where again two organizations were involved. So when we had to decide, we really looked at it from engaging with the IC of the other organization and the complainants organization, and they said, why don't you pick it up? And so we had the discussion and took it up. So I think these are basic principles that we'll have to keep in mind. And the other thing that when it comes to the digital space is where it can be very tricky, because you might not have worked with each other, but you might have just picked up something on on social media because you know the name of the individual and you saw on Facebook. Or so again, yes, if there has been an impact to the individual, then you definitely pick it up at the workplace and then talk about it. Like recently we had a situation where the two individuals did not even know, the complainant did not even know the face of the person whom she complained about, but her contact had been picked up in some form or fashion. And then we had to engage with the individuals, figure out who that person was, and then go into the inquiry. So there are bound to be situations like this coming up. So I think the principles remain, if you are mindful of the principles of impact, and the business nexus. I think these things become very, I don't think they become points of discussion in a way, I would put it.
Yeah, thank you, Gayatri, for giving such, great practical scenarios and examples. I think that really helps understanding situations and navigating through such situations as well. So moving on, next question to you, Niharika. How should employers coordinate with clients, vendors, contractors, or third-party organizations when an incident involves multiple workplaces?
I think Gayatri has touched upon it twice. So yes, this becomes tricky, or who the other party is. Like, I gave the case where suppose it's a client organization. Then the principle that has been followed for years has been that the respondent's organization picks it up. But yes, the latest advancements in law and the case studies, the complainant's organization is also picking up cases, because obviously it also depends on where you can investigate. The whole yes, when we are doing this whole workplace or not investigation and we're deciding on it, expansive definition is the principle. But then there is also IC needs to evaluate jurisdiction on basis of whether they can investigate, inquire, and deliver the recommendations on it as well. So that should be the main thought, and the strong point behind deciding whether or not to take this up as your within your jurisdiction or not. Now, if suppose it is like now with consultants working everywhere, the consultants usually go and work in other organizations, right? Now they are here, and suppose they're let's say Delhi and Chennai. Now the consultant from Delhi is flying to Chennai, working there, and does something. Now imagine if we say the respondent's company is supposed to investigate, that means the aggrieved is supposed to travel to Delhi. Obviously not. That's not possible. So where did the incident took place? Obviously, a discussion needs to be done with the IC of the respondent, needs to be notified that this has happened. Formal decisions need to be made on paper and decided, so that it's not contended after the whole inquiry is done. Because we've seen cases where everything is done, people are very boastful first that nothing will happen. When things happen, evidence is found, they challenge jurisdiction at the end, and they want to do away with all the effort that has gone into. So yes, I feel like keeping yourself updated with the procedure, following procedure for filing all the paperwork on time, making everything visible to both the parties, keeps everything in line, so that nothing is challenged later on, for sure.
Agreed. And I think, as you mentioned, a coordinated mutual IC just works wonders in such situations where both the ICs are aware that we both have to come here together here to ensure that such situation does not happen. And I also, remember of this one situation wherein requesting everyone to be on mute, please.
What are you aged about the affidavit?
Sorry for that.
71.
Okay. So there was this one particular situation I remember wherein the organization's female employee, she had been through sexual harassment through one of the cab drivers provided by the organization. Now, the organization had outsourced this cab driver things to some other organization. And when this situation happened, they went to that organization first saying that because the respondent is from your organization, would you like to take up this case? Now, there were 10 or more employees, but with no functioning IC. So that's when they realized that we have vendors, we have contractors, and we have these people. But what about them following the law? Do they even look at these aspects? Though they took up the case because, of course, the other organization couldn't. But then they also connected with us and understood that can we have this as a clause in our agreements that if you have to follow a certain law, can we check if they're following it or not? And can that be a basis of us saying that we'll not work with you if this is how you're going to work? So I think that kind of presence of mind of the organizations and their efforts to ensure that our vendors, the people that our employees would come in contact with, are also following these processes and due processes. I think that would really help creating that safe kind of an environment.
I feel now it is
Sorry,
being
go ahead.
done now. It is being done now. Like I both Gayatri and me, we come from automotive background. So you know how IATF has certain requirement at OEM, and then it goes to tier 1, and then it goes to tier 2. So I feel like the same, because I am a tier 2 supplier. So I, before a certain years, like nobody was asking about Porsche. Nobody knew about Porsche. But now everything has changed. It's like everywhere they're putting a checkpoint so that it trickles down to the most basic things, that like as a tier 2 supplier, now I am also supposed to check my vendors. And now we are changing our purchase agreements and saying that if vendor agreements, if you don't have an IC, then whatever happens, if it involves, then you will come under our jurisdiction.
Yes.
So because you've got to address it to the ground level, that is the whole intent. And that, I feel, that is happening now. I'm sitting here and I'm seeing the difference, because when I started trainings, everybody at least in this area was like, oh wow, nobody does Porsche in industries here, why, what are you talking about? And I'm like, no, file annual report. I was like, no, where to file? There is nobody to file. But it has actually changed.
Yeah.
Very, very drastically, very dramatically. It has actually changed in the remote industrial areas also. So I feel it is making a difference now.
Actually, that's wonderful to hear, Niharika. Because sometimes with corporates, like for example, it's actually my first reaction to yours, your comments on compliance and making sure vendors have training was, coming from a background that I have said, it was always a given for us, right? Our contracts or agreements with our vendors would always include clauses that made sure that they were statutorily compliant. And being on the IC, one of the things that we've always watched out for, but work to do still, is how effectively are those vendors providing posh trainings to their employees before they are onboarded. Like you have housekeeping staff, you have drivers, you have they have to know about their rights as well, right? So I think that is fundamental in all this. Sometimes we forget about we just look at our core employee group, but then that becomes very fundamental. And we've had situations like you described where there have been misbehaviors in the cab, and immediate, because of this availability of this agreement or clause, your actions become that much easier and stronger, and message lands extremely powerfully.
Agreed. Yes. I think that's, we're glad that we are in a workspace, or in an environment where people are actually working towards it. It's great to hear that. Moving on, next question to you, Gayatri. What policy, wording, and employee training can help reduce the ambiguity around extended workplace scenarios?
So I think from a policy wording, I think there's a lot that can be changed, but that's, I don't know if that is something that is going to happen as quickly as we would all like to be. So I think that's where employee training and sensitization programs by subject matter experts and organizations like yourselves come into play. I think that's where, we as ICs should pick up, because the first portion of our responsibility is prevention. So when it comes to prevention, I think it is our due responsibility to think of all these situations that we hear from, learn from, has happened in organizations like ours, and then incorporate that into our training. I think ICs going to be playing a very, very strong role in this, because when you know that building our capability continuously, not saying that, oh, I've become an IC member and I'll use my common sense to to decide on situations, is not going to work. So what are you learning from the outside, and how are we bringing it back to our organizations through training, building awareness? I think those are going to be playing a very, very important role. ICs need to be very, very proactive, but not in the face. I think because in the face can lead to different types of reaction, but you have to be persistent and proactive. So employee training plays a very big role. Like in my organization, over the last few years that I've been the presiding officer, we have tried to improve the trainings that we have done every year in terms of numbers. Like it's quite a huge organization. So we did a couple of thousands first year. How can we take it up a notch? Then we realized it's not practical. So this year we rolled out online training modules and made it mandatory for all employees to take it. So in fact, as I speak this month, everybody's supposed to complete online training. So I think as you look at these continuous refreshers, messages, posters, constantly, I think every month calendars, I think these are the ways that you can reduce ambiguity. Because practically when we go and train, we get questions from our managers or questions from people. Okay, how I'm worried about conveying a message to a women employee. How should I land it? Can I go and say this? Can I not say this? So these are things that I think we have to play a role. One is the policy wording, etc. But I think based on and there are so many cases, decisions that are coming from the courts. I think those are the things that we can really pick up, weave into our training. So we have a very responsible, as external members, organizations, IC members, and subject matter experts. I think that is the way I would, sort of put it over here.
Being a trainer, I've always observed that, especially in employee awareness sessions, when we explain them the definition of workplace, there are various questions that come. What if I meet them after working hours? What about this? What about that? So we try to, provide that kind of knowledge, but I always end my answer with, please refer it to your internal committee. They are in a better position to educate you, to make you understand what about this particular situation. So if you are in doubt and you're not sure about what about this situation, can I refer it back to my internal committee? Speak to your internal committee. They'll explain you better, they'll make you understand about the situation, and they'll tell you if this is acceptable or not, whatever they have to do with that situation. But don't keep it to yourself. Let it go. Speak up to your internal committee. So I think that kind of safe environment where they can actually speak to the internal committee is also very important. I think that will also reduce that ambiguity to a very far extent.
Yeah, and if I may, I think another best practice that I've seen happen, and working with you at HELP has also helped, is calendarize the messaging that you want to do every month. So this month, I think we're speaking about workplace. So
Yes.
previous month it would have been consent. Earlier month it is bystanders. So next month it would be something else. So you sort of keep reminding people about their responsibilities, because the success does not lie in our hands. The success lies in every employee's hands. I think that messaging becomes very, very important.
True. Just to add on the answer here, that policies, I felt in my experience, I've always suggested, and I've been stressing on this, have a digital conduct policy. It is a must have in today's day and age, because the digital space is increasing. It's not just emails now, it's not direct DMs on Messenger app, which is official. It's Instagram, it's Telegram, it's Facebook, it's Snapchat, and it's like it's ever increasing, and there's no limit to it. And consensual relationship policy, having like travel policy if you're outside. So all of those things, I feel, reiterates the professional conduct that we actually want people to follow. Because once you lead every discussion against the principle of professional conduct, and this is what we want to maintain, it does not become don't do this, it becomes do this, be professional with each other wherever you're representing your organization, and we are removing half the complaints as it is then.
True, very true. Thank you both of you. Last question to you, Niharika. What practical steps can organizations take to ensure safe work-related spaces, both physically and virtually? I think you just answered this part as well.
Just answered. Yes, that's true. So, but concluding on what we've been discussing, when we discuss everything from the point of view of workplace, I feel the approach that IC needs to take is that, yes, the definitions needs to be expansive, but it needs to be expansive with evidence-based approach. Everything needs to be discussed from that perspective. Do I have you? Okay, I thought. Yeah. Okay.
You're stuck, Niharika.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. So I was just saying that, like expansive but evidence-based approaches, I feel like the best principle to, evaluate everything against that. Yes, we should consider how much we can expand on the notion of workplace to give as much protection to people as possible, because that is the main objective behind the law. But yes, evidence based approach helps us to know whether we can actually give justice to people or not. So I feel like that kind of concludes the discussion.
Yes, yes, yes. Anything to add, Gayatri, from your end?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right, so I think we're done with the list of questions that I had. I can see a lot of questions on the chat box, so I'll just read out each one of it, and any one of you can pick those, and y'all can add on. So the first question is from Savita. If any SH Act happens after office hours, why are employers and IC entertaining such complaints when it has not happened at so-called definition within the definition of workplace?
We've just covered that point, that if
Yes.
it has happened between two employees, the effect of that will come back to the employment, because the aggrieved will feel that there's a hostile work environment where I have to function. So
Yes.
hence it is within the jurisdiction. It's not expansive also. It is well within it.
Yes, yes. And I think the second question from Sri Priya is also around the same lines, that if two or more employees go for a party outside workplace, not sponsored by the organization, and if there is lack of evidence, would it still come under POSH? Yes, it does come under POSH. ICs can take these situations, up, because as Niharika just mentioned, they come back to the same organization, they share a professional relationship. It might affect their working environment, and if there's an impact, it definitely has to be taken up by internal committees. If a male employee comments on social media about a women employee in private DM of a social media platform about sleeping with the manager or to get promoted to another male employee, does it come under POSH? Any one of you who would like to answer?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. So if a male employee comments on a social media about a women employee in her private DM of social media platform about sleeping with the manager to get promoted to another male employee, does it come under POSH?
Yes, it does. Yes,
I think very simple, straight, yes.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It's like I don't even understand the contention behind why will it not be.
Exactly. So Vijay says there has been a case of university professor acting as a supervisor to a student, and in that situation posting objectionable messages on WhatsApp, held as falling foul of the POSH law. Yes, it is definitely under POSH, but I'm not really sure of the question here. So if you want, you would just rewrite the question. We'll take it up. Another question from Shri Priya. Can employees who identify as the third gender raise a POSH complaint while the law is specific to women? Will the trans person can raise concerns of unfair proceedings if the IC of a particular gender? Again, a little tricky question, I would say. I'm not really sure of the question, but I think the main question here is that can employees who belong to a third gender raise a POSH complaint?
Yes. So as per law, law includes protection to women and trans women. If you have a gender neutral policy, you can extend it to all genders. And the second part of the question, will the trans person can raise concern? If so, basically they're saying if there's no representation of a third gender in the IC, should it be of any concern? Well, I don't think it should be of any concern until and unless you can see that the IC is not understanding the problem or not being responsive. If that is there, then obviously you can raise an issue. But I don't feel gender is an issue, because if we go by definition of law, it needs to have more women in the IC than men. So the men can also raise this complaint. It has nothing to do with gender. I feel it has to do with the understanding. And if you've been harassed and not being given a fair chance to present your case and are not being heard, I feel then it's an issue. And Gayatri, you can please add to this.
No, completely with you, Niharika. I think that is the most important thing. Women covers women, so trans women, yes. And I think it has to. You can't broad brush this. So I'm completely with you on that. Yeah.
So I think that's the questions that I can see on the chat box. Any further questions, you all may drop in the question in the chat box. We'll definitely take it up. Apart from that, I think thank you for a great session, Gayatri and Niharika. We'll wait for another few minutes, see if we have any further questions, and if not, then I think we can drop off.
Thank you for having. It was wonderful talking to both of you.
Likewise.
Same here. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel no questions.
No questions. Thank you for an informative session. Thank you. Thank you, Anita. It was great. I think we had a great discussion as panelists. Thank you. Thank you for being here, taking time out and being here. Thank you so much.
Have a lovely evening.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.